Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the normal weekend review show, July 12th through the 14th, 2019. The numbers are in this morning for the weekend box office. We will walk through the top 10 with some deeper dives on Crawl and Stuber, the two new wide release openers. And then we'll walk through the rest of the top 10, look at some of the stuff outside the top 10. Specifically, we're going to take a gander at The Farewell from A24 that did really well on a platform for release. We'll talk about that. And then we'll see what's going to go on here. Maybe talk about what we think Lion King's going to do next weekend. It's going to be one of the biggest openings ever for an animation film. Maybe breaks $200 million, despite the fact that the reviews aren't so good right now. But we will do a deeper dive into that a little bit later in the show. Let's walk through the top 10 here and see what happened this weekend at the box office. So number one this weekend was Spider-Man Far From Home. This is the second weekend for the huge comic book movie from Sony. $45.3 million at the box office, 51% drop. That's a good drop for a movie like this. Again, the average movie is around 50 to 55 in its second weekend. For a huge movie like a Spider-Man or an Avengers, anything below 60% I think is great. Just because, this is the type of movie that is going to be so front-loaded with that opening weekend hype. That doesn't seem to be happening here. I think one of the main reasons why is that the quality of the film is so high. People are really loving this movie. Critics loved it. I think I got to double check the Rotten Tomato score on this, but it had one of the highest Rotten Tomato verified audiences score I've ever seen. It was like 96% last weekend. 90% from critics, 96 still as the verified audience score. That's with 47,000 ticket buyers actually rating the film on Rotten Tomatoes. So that's pretty amazing. It's not going to go away. It's not going to sort of get beaten up by Lion King next weekend. Spider-Man Far From Home is going to be a big success here for Sony over the next probably couple of months. It'll keep playing. Remember Homecoming had that kind of muted opening a couple of years back, but then it had super strong legs throughout the entire summer. I think the same thing is going to happen here. Right now, Spider-Man Far From Home sits at $274 million here domestically, domestic being US and Canada, of course. Worldwide, it already sits at 847 worldwide. So this is a big win. I think there wasn't really a lot of risk here in terms of, or I think fear that this wasn't going to do all that well. But Sony hit another sort of grand slam with this, just like Homecoming was. And they've really created, I think the bigger story here, just outside this movie's performance, is to remember they had Venom last fall, which seemed like a risk. It seemed a little bit, there's a lot of production problems. It just didn't seem like a really high quality film. And it probably wasn't from an artistic perspective, but it played so well and surprised me, especially I think it opened to like $80 million domestically. So Sony now has a runway with these characters, Venom, Spider-Man, and I'm sure they'll start to add some more to that, that they can sort of build their own sort of parallel MCU. I'm not really sure how that relationship works between them and Disney and Marvel, but they have a runway now that they can kind of create their own path and have multi-million dollar, hundreds of million dollars in profit comic book movies coming out for the next 10 years. I do wonder, it's kind of funny, like they've been building this, it's like the Sony comic book universe. They sort of have been building it on the sly next to DCEU, and they've been more successful. I mean, it's a smaller amount of films, but like they've really essentially hit home runs every at bat. So we'll see how this one goes. I think it's going to play very strong throughout the summer here. Number 2 is Toy Story 4. This was its fourth weekend, 20.6 million, a great drop, 39% drop. Starting to lose some theaters. This one's kind of going to run. You got to wonder what Disney's thinking with Toy Story 4 coming out only, 5 weeks before Lion King? It just seems like maybe push Lion King. I don't know. I don't really know how they would do this in their schedule. There's been a lot of chatter about like how Disney is front loading this year to then hype up their streaming service, which I think most of these movies will then premiere on 7 to 8 months after they get released in the theaters. They'll be on Disney Plus. So maybe that's the thinking behind this. But it's going to run right into Lion King next weekend. So this is its last clear weekend, I would say, to make a ton of cash. It's sitting at 346 right now domestically. Let's take a look at international real quick. $771 million. I've kind of been all over the place on this movie. I know, like, opening weekend, I was probably a little bit too negative on how it was doing. I get the only point that I wanted to make with that sort of lower, kind of way off tracking opening was that, like, hey, this wasn't a grand slam. Essentially, this is still going to make, like, a couple $100 million in profit. It's still a big win. It just didn't really live up to the expectations of a Toy Story movie. I think this would have easily, in another year and another time, I felt like it would break that $1 billion mark pretty easily by now worldwide. It just hasn't done that. No, it's not even like a loss or anything like that. And it's hardly a disappointment. It just did not live up to sort of those very lofty ideal we have about the Toy Story franchise. I think that's the only sort of caveat to its performance right now. But overall, it's doing fantastic. Okay, so that was 1 and 2. 3 and 4, we have new wide release openers. So let's do some deep dives on these new wide releases. Number 3 overall was Crawl from Paramount. This is the monster flick about an alligator that escapes during a huge Cat 5 hurricane and terrorizes a group of people. Pretty much a Jaws format. $12 million for the weekend, which is actually, I think, in line with tracking, a little bit higher than tracking, on the higher side of tracking from last week. But interesting too is that this thing with deadline numbers and stuff coming out Thursday, Friday, we have a lot of different numbers flying around. Did $1 million previews Thursday night. It was looking more like a 10-ish opening by early Saturday based on Friday numbers, but I think it overperformed on Saturday pretty well to push into the $12 million mark now. Per theater average $3,800 per theater. Production budget on this was only $13.5 million. Deadline has, obviously I always start the show and do research on the show after the Deadline write-up comes out Sunday morning. If you ever read the Deadline write-up, you'll know that like half my show's content comes from that, and I don't shy away from that. Like if you want to do the deeper dive in the numbers, they have all that information, like post-track scores and all of the breakdown of demographics. It's all in there. They really pushed in the narrative with this movie that this is an underperformance and that maybe it would have been better on streaming or something like that. I just don't necessarily buy that argument. I don't think $12 million for this movie is all that bad. And I'll tell you why once we go through the critical reception here. So Rotten Tomatoes score 88%. There was no preview shows for this for critics, only 56 ratings so far, so it's probably a little bit skewed. But 88%, who would have thought Crawl gets an 88% Rotten Tomatoes from critics? 67 out of 100 as the actual score. That makes a little bit more sense, down to earth. Verified audience score Rotten Tomatoes, 77%. Actual score, 79 out of 100, which is pretty good. All audience score, very similar, 77%, 78 out of 100. Cinema score of a B, which is not fantastic. Here's where it doesn't make a lot of sense. The post-track score, which I do believe, if I'm thinking about this right, is an in-person survey at the movie theater. A 50% out of 100, which is very low, and only a 46% definite recommend. So there's definitely a misconnection here in terms of the data. Post-track and cinema score seem too low versus what the verified audience score is showing us on Rotten Tomatoes. So I don't know what was happening there. Overall message there from critics and audiences, kind of a mixed message, I would say. Letterboxd was 64 out of 100, which isn't the worst thing in the world. This is from, what is it, Ghost Ship or Ghost House? What production company is this? I can't remember. It's Sam Raimi's company. In any event, they put out Don't Breathe. When was that? A few years back. That score was a 60 out of 100 in Letterboxd, so it's very similar to that quality. They also did Evil Dead. Same exact score, 64 out of 100. More recent films to compare to, 68 out of 100 for Midsummer, which I saw yesterday, and dear Lord, that is one of the most bizarre and kind of amazing fever dream movies I've ever seen in my life. Just if you're a horror movie fan, just go see it. I mean, it's unbelievably ridiculous, and there's so many parts that are awesome and good, and so many parts that are just like, what are you doing? But definitely worth the price of admission. Us did 76 out of 100. That's kind of like the high water mark this year in horror, I would say. So this is below that. It's kind of like right in the middle. That's right down the middle, this whole thing, between audience scores and critics and stuff. So it's not like a huge, there's not enough success or disaster there in terms of the quality to really move the needle one way or the other. It's just like a pretty good monster flick. Like I said, 13.5 million before marketing and distribution, which is really, really low for a movie like this. So Paramount did a good job here with keeping the production costs low. Played the best in the South, which I thought was interesting. And Deadline notes this, despite the fact that there's a hurricane going on down there right now near New Orleans. I'm trying to like go through all the social media metrics that Deadline had posted. Basically, their whole argument, they're trying to do a postmortem on this film and say that it didn't do well. I just don't agree with that. I think that this number is okay. Where's it going to end here? I don't know if there's a big international audience for this, but 12 million is not the worst thing in the world. And like baseline, it's tough though because it's a horror movie. Usually they have lower multipliers. But you could argue that it's going to do what, $36 million domestically, probably 40. I don't see how that's a huge loss. I can't imagine they spent more than like $30 million, $20 million to market the thing. I mean, they didn't put that many TV ads out. And it was a good weekend to counter program. I mean, that's obvious. For the weekend before Lion King, the weekend after Spider-Man, it was a good opening for it. I just don't think the expectation should be that high. Deadline kept on comparing it to the Meg, and the Meg cost like $70 million, and they spent like $50 million. Like a ton of money was poured into that movie, and rightly so because they had to make it successful. Tons of China. There was also a Chinese co-finance situation there too, so they had a lot of money on the line across the entire world. So they had to make that work. Crawl's just a smaller movie, and it's a genre flick. And I think $40 million domestically is not that bad. Let's see if it's open internationally at all. I haven't checked that one out yet. It doesn't look like it. Or at least I can't see that right now. In any event, so I don't think it's that bad of a performance. I think it's okay. So we'll see how it plays out here in terms of demographics for Crawl. And this is kind of interesting. 54% men, 46% women, right in line with your average movie-going audience. It's usually like 53% men. Or maybe actually that's changed in 2018, has it? I was looking at this the other day. No, it's still 50. So gender breakdown for the average movie-going audience among all ticket buyers, 53% male, 47% female. So that's pretty much in line with that. Let's see what else. Under 25 was 38%, which is a little bit higher than normal. Usually it's about 34%. Over 25 was 62, obviously a little bit under than normal. In terms of who really liked it the most, and again, this comes from Deadline, the women over 25 loved it the most, giving it 74% on, I believe that's post-track, which is way higher than the 50% average. I don't know, there's got to be some element there that played into it with the plot and story. Diversity breakdown, 42% white, 20% Latino, 20% African-American, and 18% Asian other. That's a really interesting number for me here because the average movie-going audience is 55% white. So this under-indexed in the South. So I'm thinking that, and also the Latino audience under-indexed a normal movie-going audience. They're usually about 23%. What happened here is that the African-American audience showed up a lot higher than normal, 12% on average versus this 20% average here, or 20% take. And also the Asian sort of other demographic, as the MPA labels it, usually at 7%. Here they were at 18%. So those two groups of people really drove the audience, the numbers here. So like I said, baseball metaphor, maybe like a single double, slide into second. I don't get the doom and gloom around this movie that Deadline was peddling. I just don't understand it. And maybe I'm missing a whole portion of the marketing cost or something. It just seems like a pretty average performance for a movie that costs $13.5 million to make. So I wouldn't be that unhappy with it. Okay, so that was number 3 this weekend. Number 4 was also a new wide release opener from Fox. And this one kind of feels like it was abandoned by Disney after the takeover. $8 million here for Stuber. Opened in 3,000 theaters. Per theater average was pretty bad at $2,600 per theater. $8 million. I don't have production costs in this one, but it probably was a lot higher than I would say Crawl. But that's just a guess. I don't know. This one didn't do all that well with critics. 46% in Rotten Tomatoes. 52 out of 100 is the actual score. Verified audience score was a lot higher at 80%. 82 out of 100 is the actual score. that, I mean, there's something, they missed an opportunity, because if you're hitting 80% on Rotten Tomatoes, it's okay, it's not amazing, but it's good enough where you could easily get a $15-20 million opening out of it. All audience score a little bit lower at 77%, but similar, kind of a 79 out of 100 is the actual quality score from all audiences there. Cinema score of B, just like Crawl. Post-track was way higher than Crawl, though, 70%. Definitely recommend was a little bit higher, 51%. Letterboxd, not very good here. So the film nerds, which is kind of like understandable, didn't really like it that much. 58 out of 100 was the score, versus Murder Mystery, which is a recent Netflix doc. One thing I like about Letterboxd is they do also include Netflix movies, which I think if we're talking rated R comedies, we kind of have to maybe transition some of that to rating streaming movies, just because that's where they all went. And so Murder Mystery had a 52 out of 100, which is terrible, but like I don't think Netflix cares, because I watched it. I watched Murder Mystery last night. And why did I watch it? I don't know. It was on Netflix. It was there. It's Adam Sandler, Jennifer Aniston. I wanted to see what they did with it. Is it good? No, it's a fucking terrible movie, but it's a passable movie that you can put on in the background while you're doing work or doing something else. And that's all I think Netflix wants. Netflix doesn't care about quality at all. They do not care. They care about time consumption. If you read their stock reports or whatever, quarterly reports, it literally says that in there. They don't care. As long as people are watching something and spending time on Netflix, they don't care about the quality of the art. So I think that's sort of what Murder Mystery is all about. You just want to hook people in and have them spend their time on Netflix. That's what they want people to do. In any event, so similar quality in terms of the output there, 52 for Murder Mystery, 58 for Stuber. Blockers, which was a big movie, rated R comedy last year, 64 on Letterboxd. Game Night was a 70. I think the high water mark, and probably I don't know when this movie came out, like 15 years ago, a long time ago. Hot Fuzz was 80. So it's nowhere near that. The quality here is not very great, but there is a silver lining with that verified audience score of 80% and an 82 out of 100 rating. I kind of wondered, though, there's a little part of me, because remember Rotten Tomatoes was getting hacked constantly. And so the all audience score is good here, but that verified audience score is just, it's high. I'm just kind of wondering, like, did the Fox and somebody kind of buy up tickets and have people rate? I don't know. I'm just saying, if you wanted to do that, it's not that hard to do. Think about it this way, like the number of ratings on Rotten Tomatoes verified audience score is not that high. Like the number of people who have actually rated it. So it could be, if you wanted to, you probably could finagle that in some way where, you buy up, what's a ticket cost? $8-10, something like that. You buy up a couple thousand of them, mark it up to a marketing cost, and get that score high on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm sure Rotten Tomatoes is looking into ways to prevent that type of fraud. But I don't know. I feel like if someone wanted to do it, they could do it. I'm just trying to look here at so there's only 1,000 ratings so far. I could easily, 200 tickets. I could easily do that for, $10,000 or something. And get that score higher. I'm just saying, it's still not, totally, a pristine rating that can't be hacked. So that might be going on there, but I don't want to make any accusations. In any event, so audiences here for Stuber, 55% men, 45% female, pretty typical. Under 25 was 27%. That's your weakness right there. If I'm looking at numbers, I'm just saying, why is this not doing so well? You did not capture the under 25 audience. For something like this, rated R comedy with two sort of youngish stars, you need to get under 25s to show up. You need to get teenagers to show up. You need to get that 18 to 24 year old demographic to really come out and be hyped about it. And they're the people who sort of spread the word on social media and get other people. They're kind of like the vanguard audience sometimes. And if you don't have them for a movie like this, you're not going to have anybody. So I played a little bit too old. In terms of what else here, the biggest demographic was males over 25. That makes sense. Diversity demographics here, 47% white, lower than normal, 22% Latino, kind of in line, 18% African American, again over-indexed, 13% Asian, also over-indexed. So, what happened here? This is, Crawl does not deserve a postmortem. It just doesn't. It doesn't. Stuber does, because you have two big stars in it. Decently big stars, usually kind of like side characters, but now they're sort of the main attraction here. The red flag here for me is that per theater average, right? They pushed it out in 3,000 theaters, which is lower than a super wide release, right? So why are you only doing $2,600 per theater? There's something not right about that. There's something that's not sitting well in terms of either the marketing or the concept of it. And I'll tell you this just anecdotally. I follow the industry. I look at this stuff all the time. Obviously, I do this show every week, and I'm always reading about stuff. I heard basically nothing about Stuber for months before its release. I heard maybe like a chatter South by Southwest about it, but like beyond that, not much. The name is absolutely stupid. It makes no sense. The marketing itself, I mean, you watch the trailer and you're like, okay, but like, where's the hook? Where's the spectacle? And it's the thing I keep coming back to, where I think Crawl had a spectacle angle. Hey, it's a huge alligator. There's a hurricane. Let's have some fun. That's your spectacle marketing. I'm hooked in. I'm going to watch that movie. Maybe not in the theater. It's too much money. Stuber, I have no desire to see it. I have no desire to see it on streaming. No desire to see it, VOD, anything like that. Maybe if it's on basic cable in 2 years on like FX, like I might like watch it for 10 minutes to see if it's good. So they didn't catch me at all. And I'm kind of wondering whether they didn't catch anybody else. I think it's just the concept of the movie, I think, is fine. Like, it's not that much different than like the Wild Night Out action movie, right? Like that's a whole sort of rated R platform. Game Night was a good example of that. So was Blockers. Both those movies worked. This one didn't because, I don't know, maybe there's a lot in play. Maybe Disney sort of cut it off at its knees. It didn't want to deal with it after the merger. Maybe there just wasn't, the quality of the movie just wasn't there. But even if the quality's not there, you can find a way to sell a product, even if it's sort of middling quality. And they just didn't do that here. It did feel kind of, and I think Deadline is right about this, it did feel kind of abandoned. It's sort of like this, we'll take this on Fox, but like we're not going to actually sell it, which I think is too bad because I think it could have been a little bit of a winner. There's not a lot of comedies out there, especially rated R comedies. It's a dying. I did like a really big show on rated R comedies, like I want to say like a year and a half ago, because I find it so funny as someone who really saw the rise of them in the Audis, the naughties, if you will. I hate that term. I don't know why I said it. The Audis, the 2000s, 2000 to 2010. The extreme, like sort of massive rise of those movies, and then to see it just sort of dissipate and fall apart over the last 5-10 years has been kind of insane. Something like Stuber, if it came out 15 years ago, opens to $30 million, closes out at like 90 pretty easily. That just didn't happen here, and it's probably going to lose some money because there's just not any way it's going to make up its production costs or marketing costs. Any event, my sort of take on it is I think it got abandoned by Disney, and I think that the marketing itself just never really hooked anybody in and there was no spectacle here. If there's no spectacle, people are not going to show up. There's too many other things going on, and there's too many other different entertainment options, and that was the failure here. Okay, that's enough on Stuber. Let's keep going. Number 5 was Yesterday, 6.7 million. Fantastic drop, 33% drop. Like I've been saying, this is going to be a word of mouth hit. $2,400 per theater average, $48 million so far. I don't know what it is doing worldwide. Let me just double check on that super quick. $80 million worldwide. So it's not really setting the world on fire, so to speak. But I think it's domestically, you can't argue with it. 48's pretty good. It's going to continue to have low drops. And like I said, it's just going to keep playing and playing and playing. It added 140 theaters this weekend in its third weekend. For a movie like this, that's a really good sign. So I think it's just going to kind of be a low simmer for the next month or so in the theaters. Number 6 was Aladdin, 5.8 million. It won't go away. 22% drop. I mean, this is insane. $2,300 per theater. Its 8th weekend. Sits at 331 domestically. God, Guy Ritchie must be like besides himself with joy that his career has been resurrected. $960 million worldwide. Obviously, we'll hit $1 billion here in a week or so. Look, it's a grand slam, and there's no other way to put it. One of the more surprising grand slams, just because there was a lot of sort of fear about the movie, and especially with Guy Ritchie being involved, the early clip coming out. And it really, I think it bodes well. Well, does it bode well for Lion King? We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about what else is coming out in the next few weeks. But I'm not sure that it does because, well, I'll save that for later. But just the final word on this for this weekend on Aladdin is fantastic, amazing drop, continues to be a high performer. Number 7 was Annabelle Comes Home, still sticking around, 5.5 million. We talked about this having that weird holiday release where it's just going to keep making money. Because, the weekday stuff during the July 4th holiday, and then people didn't get a chance to see it. It's just, there's something about this holiday for movies like this. The Purge election was another one where it's going to have a really high multiplier for a movie that usually has a really low multiplier. 41% drop, fantastic for a horror movie. Third weekend sits at $60 million so far. Like, that's great for this. I think its price on Hollywood Stock Exchange was like $63 million. I want to make some money off that. So this thing, it's just like kind of like Aladdin in a different way, just like sort of like Yesterday in a different way, just sitting on that back burner, making some real good cash every weekend. It's going to be profitable. It's definitely a win for Warner Brothers' New Line. Number 8 was Midsummer, 824, 3.5 million. Not a bad drop for a movie like that. 45% drop this weekend and second weekend. Per theater average is anemic though at $1,300 in its second weekend. That's not good. Hey, look, we all called it. It sits at $18 million so far domestically. Like this movie would never be successful. There's no way to make this movie successful. They had a really great marketing campaign. They had the biggest hype in the world from a group of film lovers all over Twitter, like all over Letterboxd. Like, this has been like the horror nerd film of the summer, of the year, maybe. And rightly so. Like, I went to see it yesterday and I talked a little bit about this. It's just bonkers. It is the most crazy film I've ever seen in the theater, hands down. Nothing even really comes close. I'm surprised the MPA let this thing out. They had to fight the NC-17 battle here, but that was because of like male genitalia, like that, and like that's just like the stupidest MPA rating thing ever. If whatever, if you see a men's parts, it's an NC-17 essentially, almost automatically. But here, there was some stuff in this movie that I'm just like, and I am a horror film nerd. I've watched the craziest stuff from the 80s, 70s, like some really sick stuff that came out in that time period when horror was just kind of like a free-for-all. And this definitely rivals a lot of it because it's just like, it's ridiculous. I think that's the whole point, which is interesting because it does play into the spectacle concept that I'm getting to over and over again. This was a spectacle movie, but normal people didn't show up. And so, and then I wonder why. This is not going to do as well as Hereditary. Hereditary, remember, came out last summer. God, how did he do these two crazy movies back to back? I mean, Ari Aster is just, look, it's funny, like, I didn't like Midsummer as a film that much, but as an experience, I was like, easily worth the $7 I spent on the movie ticket, and then some. And the same thing with Hereditary. I've seen Hereditary like 4 or 5 times since then, and it's one of those movies that it stays with you a super, super long time, right? It's just one of those movies that just it gets into your head, and then like, I remember after seeing Hereditary, I just couldn't stop thinking about it for like weeks. Does that make it good? Not necessarily. And I look back on Hereditary, I'm like, oh yeah, it's not nearly as good as I thought it was. In Midsummer, with its flaws, kind of makes me go back to Hereditary and be like, oh yeah, like this guy needs maybe a little bit better of maybe he's like a co-writer to help him out on the script side of things. I'm not sort of being condescending. It just, there wasn't a good story in either of them, especially the second half. But visually, editing, music, just the cinematic experience that he creates is pretty amazing. And with Midsummer, in terms of its financial performance, look, $18 million, I would be happy with that. If I'm A24, like, I don't even think they would love to make money on this and make a lot of cash, but they knew that it probably was going to happen. It's almost like a calling card for them. They get movies like this. You get all the film, you get all the critics, you get all the sort of nerds who are really into film excited about it. A24 has this brand cachet now that they can cash in whenever they want to. If they want to do kind of a crazy art film with a big director, they're going to go to A24 because of this reputation that a movie like Midsummer builds. And so this is why they get movies like Moonlight, which won Best Picture a couple of years ago, and they have a whole crowd. Lady Bird, that's how they get those types of movies, is because they're known to just let directors do what they want to do. But from a financial perspective, it's probably a loss or a push. I'm sure they spent some money to market this thing. It was all over the place. And its financial performance in no way matches that marketing cost. So it's an interesting movie nonetheless. I mean, if I would recommend it to absolutely nobody unless you are super into horror movies and don't mind extreme gore and extremely unsettling images. Because that's kind of what it's all about. It's less a movie and more of a theme ride. I'll put it to you that way. It's like, can you take this or not? In a lot of different ways, psychological and just like gore and stuff like that. So like, I can't recommend it, but like, it is one of the most fascinating movies I've seen this year, hands down, and maybe even ever. Okay, so that's number 8. Number 9 was Secret Life of Pets 2. You're looking at 3.1 million, 33% drop, 147 so far domestically. This one just kind of petered out, 298 was the take on this one worldwide. I gotta double check what it was. The last one did. Secret Life of Pets did, okay, so totally different book. The worldwide total for the first one was 875, and this one's sitting at 298, and pretty much closing the books on it. That's not good. We're not going to see a third one. I know I've said that 1,000 times, but I just got to say it again. I got to remind myself that Secret Life of Pets, not necessarily flop, but an extreme underperformance, bordering on floppage. But it cost $80 million to make, so they're probably not going to lose money. Men in Black International is a massive flop, sitting at $2.2 million here, 41% drop, which is not bad, but it's starting to lose a lot of theaters, lost 1,000 theaters, $1,300 per theater average, sits at $76 million domestically. International is going to be important on this one, I think, to 239 internationally worldwide. Ooh, that is brutal for this movie. This one's going to lose so much money. Like, this has got to be a $150 million loss for Sony. Like, I don't know what they were thinking. I've done multiple deep dives on that movie. I don't know. I think maybe it was a nostalgia play that just went really bad really quickly. It's too bad because both the stars, Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth, are fantastic. I think they're both great A-listers. Tessa Thompson's a little bit new, I think, as an A-lister. I think she's phenomenal. It's too bad. It felt like it could have been really something special and could have done really well, but I think Sony just dropped the ball with it. Okay, so that's your top 10. Outside the top 10, Rocket Man 1.7 sits at 91 so far. Nowhere near Bohemian Rhapsody, but it sounds like it's going to make some money according to sort of the Deadline insiders. Avengers Endgame still out there. $851 million domestically. Worldwide, have we passed Avatar yet? Oh, I gotta check. I gotta make sure that we have not passed into the all-time great. No, God, it's so close. It's $7 million off of Avatar, or $8 million, something like that. So hopefully next weekend we can announce that Avengers Endgame is the biggest film of all time, which would be cool. I mean, I think it deserves it. It's a great film, and it's really the culmination of a decade of brilliant work from Marvel and Disney. I mean, they really have created something special culturally, not just it's outside of film at this point. That's how big it's a cultural movement. So I think that will end up taking the all-time record. What else to talk about here outside the top 10? John Wick 3 sitting at 167 million right now. That's fantastic. We'll see a fourth one of that sooner rather than later. Child's Play, $28 million. How did that one do internationally? I believe only... Because it's... Oh, God, come on. Child's Play did no international release. Like, what are they thinking? United Artists releasing, I swear to God, they have fucked up 3 times. Booksmart, Late Night, and now Child's Play. Like, what are they doing over there? Like, they've got to figure this stuff out. I don't know how long they're going to last either, because that's United Artists Releasing is a whatever distribution sort of organization between MGM and Annapurna. Annapurna's kind of, I don't know, they're in money troubles constantly. It's a weird organization because it's like Megan Ellison runs it, but I think a lot of it's the Oracle billionaire Larry Ellison's money, I think. So it's like one of those like almost like patronage sort of studio distribution arms. And it just doesn't seem like they're really finding their footing. And something like Child's Play is an easy home run. Like, you got to release that thing internationally. It should have made like $20 million opening weekend domestically, closed out at like 50 easily. And this didn't work. So I don't know what's going on over there. What else? Limited releases. Let's talk a little bit some limited stuff. Last Black Man in San Francisco is doing okay, having a really slow rollout. I mean, this is like the platform of platforms here. It's been out for 6 weeks, still only in 200 theaters. Per theater average is just not there, I think, to expand much more. It did expand 20 more theaters last weekend. It sits at 3.3 million. Apparently, it's a wonderful film, A24. Again, A24's calling card. They can do movies like Last Black Man in San Francisco when Hereditary makes $40 million or Lady Bird makes $40 million. They can do a movie like this and it makes 3.3 and it's still a success. But the one that I'm really fascinated about, and peek your ears up on this one in terms of if you're into award stuff and Oscars, A24 released The Farewell, which is a movie, kind of a family drama about an elderly Chinese woman who is dying, but her family sort of refuses to tell her that she's dying to sort of, I guess, cheer her up and not make her sad. Trailer looks phenomenal. I saw it before Midsummer. It looks really good. There was a ton of buzz out of this, I believe, out of Sundance. A24 put it out this weekend. Platform release, typical New York, Los Angeles. I'm sure in the Angelica in New York. I'm sure at ArcLight in Los Angeles. $87K per theater. That is our highest per theater average this weekend of this year. Actually beats Avengers Endgame. Totally different ballgame than with that. But $87K, that is a wow moment. That's like breakout is possible. Doesn't mean it's a given. Remember, Steve Jobs did over $100K per theater in New York, Los Angeles, and then sort of hit a brick wall in wide release. So it's not a given, but it is a really good indicator that this thing could stick around all year for award season, and I think that it will because it looks really good. And just as someone who loves film and the art form, go see this movie because I know it's fantastic, and these movies need to be supported, just like Last Black Man in San Francisco. Go out to your local theater, indie theater, go downtown if you need to see it, because we want to keep these movies sort of playing in the movie theater instead of just going straight to streaming. Okay, that's my soapbox moment. Art of Self-Defense, also, there was quite a lot of buzz around that one. Did 7 theaters. This is Bleecker Street, another smaller distribution company. Only did $17K per theater on 7. That's going nowhere. That's sort of a brick wall. I think that's mostly it for the top 10 and the limited stuff. So the movies to watch out for: The Farewell, I think Crawl had a decent performance. Stuber had this kind of flopping. Spider-Man strong. Toy Story very strong as well. Yesterday, Word of Mouth. Aladdin, I think, to me is just like the biggest movie right now of the summer. It's just an amazing performance. And of course, Avengers Endgame about to beat Avatar. Probably the biggest story of the last 20 years at the box office. In any event, let's talk a little bit about what's coming out over the next couple of weeks. So obviously next weekend we have Lion King. 4,500, maybe more theaters than that. I have no idea where it's going to go. The reviews are terrible. I noticed when I saw the first clips come out, I was like, the trailer, I was like, look, I'm not part of the sort of Disney fanboy crew, clearly. But like, I'm always into spectacle. I'm always into what's big and what's going on out there, just as like a social sort of excitement thing, like hype. I'm a big fan of hype. And there was so much hype with that trailer. And then I think I follow, what's his name? Billy Eichner, who's a phenomenal comedian. He's in the movie, Seth Rogen. They did the voices of Timbo and Pumbaa. I can't remember their names, whatever. Clearly I'm not a fanboy. So that they dropped a clip on, probably was premiered on Jimmy Kimmel or something, but he dropped it on Twitter and I watched it and I was like, this looks absolutely terrible. Like, this looks unwatchably bad. Now, keep in mind, I'm not somebody I did not see the Jungle Book remake. I didn't like the way it looked, or the photorealistic versus cartoon animation. It just didn't make any sense to me. It's like, and the people have been like really sort of zeroing in on that factor, especially critics. They're like, why do we need a photorealistic remake of The Lion King? And it looks, I mean, I'll be honest, it looks terrible to me. But I'm still gonna go see it, and so are most people. And so, like, despite those weird critical misgivings about what this product actually is, this is a nostalgia trip. This is the member berries plot thing from South Park and talking about Force Awakens. So I don't think the critical sort of negativity, it didn't hurt Aladdin. It may even helped Aladdin. I think the same thing is going to happen with Lion King. It's going to be bigger than Aladdin, I would assume. Like, what are we talking about for an opening here? I think we're talking, I don't know. I would guess 170 to 200 would be a good range for opening weekend. Worldwide, I have no idea. Final take for something like this, I have no clue. $2 billion, $2.5 billion, higher maybe. Let's say, okay, let's just do the quick math just to sort of keep ourselves honest. Let's say it does 180 domestically, guaranteed 3x multiplier, probably 4x multiplier. You're looking at 540. Let's just say, I'm going to say $600 million domestic. Wow, that's a lot of money that I'm thinking about it. Okay, maybe not $600 million. Let's say 550. Let's be a little bit more conservative. 550 domestic. I don't know, baseline 40% domestic take versus worldwide. Okay, maybe 2 billion was way too high. I would guess 1.5 billion is the basement for this. I can't see it going lower than that worldwide. So, and maybe that's kind of outrageous, but that's sort of my quick read on that. It's going to be a huge success. But I do wonder, there's a little bit, because of that critical backlash, and I noticed this on Twitter, that like bigger names, celebrities, and people were saying, hey, this looks kind of weird. Like, this doesn't seem great. Even like who was the presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, who's not polling, he's polling at like 1% in the Democratic primary. He put out a tweet about this and like, why are you doing this? Got 50K likes on Twitter, which is, decently high. There might be a growing sort of reaction to these movies. And so, that's something just to look out for. Like, Little Mermaid just got cast. We have Mulan coming out later this fall. So, I think that there is this element here of maybe they're doing too much. Maybe this is too much of the remake stuff. Maybe it's too much nostalgia. But like when this thing makes $1.5 billion worldwide, like I don't see how that's going to be. I don't see how Disney stops this train from running. And is where they, what movie they're not going to remake. Maybe Pocahontas, because it's very problematic if they tried to remake that one now. So yeah, I think it's going to be a massive win, a grand slam. But I do think there's a weird sort of bitterness to it all that might not play out well long term. But I've said the same thing about comic movies, and I've always been wrong. So I'm probably wrong about this too. But there is that element there. Watch the critical reaction to it, because it's already super negative on some level. And you can even tell that the top critics are like kind of holding back a bit on how negative they want to be, because they don't want to lose their readership. But I think there's definitely a critical backlash to this movie that is brewing right now. But I don't think it's going to hurt the numbers at all. Okay, that's next weekend. To close out July, oh man, the summer's almost over. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I don't think this is going to do well. I don't see it as a big wide release opener, maybe $20 million. I know people are saying it's going to do a lot better than that. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. And then we're into August. I'm excited for this August, just because there's a lot happening. Hobbs and Shaw, Dora the Explorer's coming out. I think it's going to do really well. The Kitchen looks pretty good. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark looks terrible. I saw that trailer. What a sad sort of use of that book. Because I grew up with that book. I rented it from the library like 100 times in grade school. I was like that like horror nerd freak even when I was a young kid. So yeah, I don't know what happened there. It's Lionsgate. Lionsgate always ruins everything. They're just not good at stuff in general. But I'm still excited to see it come out. 47 Meters Down on Caged comes out the 16th of August. Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Looks kind of interesting, but it's United Arts releasing because they'll screw it up. Good Boys comedy coming out from Universal. Angry Birds Movie 2, Blinded by the Light, Angel Has Fallen, Overcomer. Like Ready or Not looks great from Fox Searchlight coming on the 21st. There's a lot coming out in August, and usually August is this wasteland, but I think they learned from August 2017 where they're like, oh, it's super quiet, let's not release anything, and the box office just collapsed. You gotta throw content out there. And that's kind of like it closes out our summer here. It's gonna be Lion King. It's gonna be Hobbs and Shaw. You can have Toy Story 4 and Spider-Man holding on for months. That's what the summer's gonna look like, with a lot of sort of smaller movies coming out that are gonna do okay. And and there's nothing. The end of August, like August 30th, the Playmobil movie's coming out as SDX. I think they've run out of money though. I don't know how they're going to market it. And then the true end of summer will be It Chapter 2 on September 6th, which will open to $150 million or something crazy. And then we're into the fall, which looks like a really interesting September. Keep in mind, September is usually the worst month of the box office. You know, it kind of goes back and forth to January, February for that. But I think this year there's some Ad Astra, Rambo: Last Blood. Some interesting stuff, and maybe I'll definitely do a fall movie preview. I think maybe in August to talk about these movies. In any event, that is the show for today, guys. Thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast. I will be back. Actually, I won't be back next weekend. I'm going on a trip to Atlanta, but I'll be back in 2 weeks. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening. Bye.